Project Professional Learning Series. That's a free statewide professional opportunity to connect to the English Learner Roadmap policy and early childhood settings. Today's professional learning is facilitated by our friends at Fresno County Offices of Education and Orange County Department of Education and our partners. Today, you're joining the first session of a series of 3 opportunities. We have to go a little deeper in our learning on an important topic on meeting the needs of multilingual learners in early childhood settings by implementing the assets-based framework around the English Learner Roadmap policy. We look forward to you participating in the full 3-part series of professional learning. Today's part 1, but we hope that you can join us again on December 8th. The information will be shared throughout today's presentation. As you're joining us today, we also invite you to please subscribe. Join us on our webpage that is available through the EWIG grant. It is available at www.multilingualcalifornia.org. Once you join our webpage, you'll have access to dates of upcoming professional learning and additional resources. Before we get started today, I'd like to share that on our webpage, again, it's www.multilingualcalifornia.org, and I know our colleagues will be dropping those links on the chat. You'll be able to access additional free statewide opportunities. For example, we invite you to also come into the Biliteracy Network that is happening October 26th. This year, we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the State Seal of Biliteracy, and we want to invite you to come into an important network and a popular network on October 26th. So we'll share that information in just a moment. We are also thrilled to offer the Dual Language Design Thinking Network on November 1st, and you'll see a QR code and additional information to register. And through our partnership through MCAP grant with our colleagues, Holly from Butte County Offices of Education, we are launching an innovation or professional learning for aspiring educators. We know there's a big need in California for teachers, and there's a wider need for teachers that work with multilingual students. So that information is coming soon. But if you register on our website, you'll also be receiving updates. So once again, I want to welcome you this evening. My name is Dr. Alma Castro. I am the director for the Multilingual California Project. MCAP is a 3-year grant awarded to CAVE through the CDE Educator Workforce Investment Grant. The goals of MCAP are to provide professional learning opportunities for teachers, leaders, paraeducators, and families across the state for implementing the EL Roadmap policy with an assets-based framework. And for our colleagues, please, if we can go back to the first slide, the MCAP Alliance does include 5 county offices of education that we work with, which are Butte, Fresno, San Bernardino, Orange, San Diego, and San Diego State University, as well as our colleagues at Wexford who support with the data gathering. We know that in California, we serve 1.1 million multilingual learners across the state. Our friend and researcher, Dr. Lily Wong Fillmore, refers to our multilingual learners as our multilingual treasures. So borrowing from her, we are here today to go a little deeper on the English Learner Roadmap policy, specifically with the topic of serving early childhood education. So as we move into our next slide, our partners are here with you today, and I'll be doing some introductions in just a moment, but we want to recognize this collaboration is made possible through partnership. With you today and facilitators today are Dr. Nicole Chavez and also Nicole Chavez from OCDE, one of our MCAP partners and MCAP leads. We want to thank you for your leadership and designing today's professional learning. We also want to thank our MCAP lead from Fresno, Lisa Clark, who has collaborated with Dr. Chavez and Christine Baird, who are here with us today. Thank you. We can move it to our next slide, please. Part of our MCAP goals that we're going to go into today is to continue to build that capacity across the state for the implementation of the English Learner Roadmap policy, to support educators across the state with implementing of research-based instructional practices, and also to ensure that we are collaborating and that we are creating a multilingual collaborative statewide network of experts to guide these systems. And today, we are very pleased that you're here. You are the experts. You are our leaders. You are our teachers. You are our principals. You are our superintendents. You are our directors at the district level. So together, collectively, we are really making an impact in the education by ensuring that we have the best instructional practices and systems in our districts to meet the needs of our multilingual learners, especially in those early childhood education settings. Part of this work and our goals are also to ensure that we're emphasizing high quality models of professional learning, and we are supporting the implementation and alignment and articulation of the EL roadmap policy across and within school district systems. And I know with our colleagues from Orange County, Dr. Nicole Chavez is going to go into that specific section throughout today's presentation. As we move into our next slide, I'd now like to go ahead and introduce and welcome. And again, before we do so, we want to recognize that together with us, we have many colleagues that have joined us from district offices, from school sites. We also want to recognize that we have representatives. Our CEO from CABE, Jan Gustafson Correa, is here supporting and learning with us as we launch this three-part series. I also see that we have board representation. Dr. Moreno is joining us from CABE as well. And we want to recognize many of our participants that are here from your district offices, from the school sites, and from all levels of education. It really takes all of us together to support early childhood education, and want to welcome and thank our facilitators from OCDE and Fresno today. So I'd now like to give a warm welcome to Lisa Clark, our MCAP lead, who's going to take us into the next section of today. Bienvenidos a todos.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. As we move on to our next section, we would like to ask you to engage with us in the chat briefly. To the following questions, please answer a Y for yes or an N for no. So here's our first question. Have you ever heard of the English Learner Roadmap? Just a Y for yes and an N for no.
Thank you, Lisa. As the responses are coming in, it's exciting to see a lot of Ys. And you're in the right place. And those of us that are indicating Ns, you're also in the right place, because we are here to support your learning and support you in implementing the 4 principles of the English Learner Roadmap. Lots of good responses.
Great. And our second question is, were you aware that the English Learner Roadmap bridges preschool all the way to grade 12?
Lisa, once again, I see a majority of Ys, a couple of Ns, and we're going to engage in this question throughout today's presentation.
Wonderful. One of our MCAP Alliance goals is to support awareness and implementation of the California English Learner Roadmap, and to build on that robust body of knowledge and research that documents multilingualism as the most effective option for the academic achievement of our English learners across all content areas, and to help them in preparation to participate effectively in the global workforce. Within the California English Roadmap policy, you'll see 4 different guiding principles. Principle 1 concerns assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools, while Principle 2 helps us focus on intellectual quality of instruction and meaningful access. Principle 3 concerns systems and conditions that support effectiveness. And finally, Principle 4 concerns alignment and articulation within and across systems. Next slide, please. So what is the California English Learner Roadmap? Well, State Board of Education of California unanimously approved the California English Learner Roadmap State Board of Education policy on July 12, 2017. This policy is intended to provide guidance to local educational agencies on welcoming, understanding, and educating the diverse population of students who are English learners attending California public schools. The document that you see here on the screen, which is linked, I believe it's going to be in the chat, but if not, you can find it in the linked documents, is the English Learner Roadmap Strengthening Comprehensive Educational Policies, Programs, and Practices for English Learners. This document builds on the EL Roadmap policy and provides further guidance on educating English learners. The California EL Roadmap supports LEAs as they implement the EL Roadmap policy. Today, we will focus on the principles through the lens of early childhood educators. My colleague, Dr. Nicole Chavez, will take us through our EL Roadmap focus for today. Nicole?
Thank you so much, Lisa. And once more, acknowledging how important it is for us to acknowledge all of you as experts in this work. As Dr. Castro has referenced, this focus for this session is on leadership guidance and your ability to continue to support in creating the needed environments to support all of our classroom and school settings, with this specific focus on supporting our early childhood. So once more, thank you again for being here today. We also recognize that the focus on early childhood is an urgent one in today's context, with the many different moving parts to support our universal access to TK/PK in our school settings. With that being said, I want to revisit Lisa's articulation of how important it is for us to acknowledge the EL Roadmap policy as a policy that acknowledges and validates the importance of early childhood. In taking a moment to read this slide, which is an excerpt from the EL Roadmap policy, you'll see the emphasis placed on early childhood. Take a moment to read through this slide. This policy acknowledges that the preparation for college, career, and civic readiness, participation in a global and diverse multilingual 21st century starts in our early childhood classroom. So today we're going to continue to investigate what does this mean and how might we as leadership, as educational leaders, support in making this visible. So as reference, we're going to be focusing on various principles, specifically Principle 2 and Principle 4 for today. When looking more closely at Principle 4, which acknowledges alignment and articulation within and across systems, we see the following element stated. It is important for us to be able to have continuity. And in continuity, we must have common language and common understanding. You see listed here once more that the foundations of learning happen with you, early childhood providers and leaders. And when we think about how you might do that, we acknowledge that the EL Roadmap makes reference to the necessity to start with an asset-based mindset and language base. Found within the EL Roadmap are references to the ways in which we think thoughtfully about our language learners. So first, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some terms. It might surprise you to recognize that early childhood settings have wonderful language to support the instruction and systems within one setting that sometimes may or may not align with our K-12 structures. So just to be able to bring some prominence to some terms, you'll see within the EL roadmap policy, as well as other policy, the term of English language learner. Seen on your screen, you'll see one definition listed. Note here as well that it makes reference to transitional kindergarten through grade 12. And when supporting an English language learner, we recognize the assets that they're coming to the table with. And also acknowledge the additional scaffolds and specialized services to be able to enhance and accelerate learning opportunities for our learners. So within the K-12 system, ELL, English language learner, is frequently and prominently used. We also acknowledge that in many of our early childhood settings, we reference language learners or individuals learning another language as dual language learners. It's important that we're able to call this out within the communities that we serve. This may be something that has to build understanding with and create some common meaning. Seen on your screen, you'll see the notation of dual language learner. Again, an important first step in creating alignment and articulation across systems. As you all know, a dual language learner is a child who is first learning a language that is not English and encompasses children learning English for the first time. We see this listed within our Learning Foundations framework, listed here. We also, however, see that there is a transition in language use. From our early childhood settings through our 12th grade classrooms, we're seeing the transition of use to the terminology of multilingual learner or multilingual language learner. It's important to recognize with this asset-based term, again, creating alignment and articulation, that a multilingual language learner is an individual that is learning a language in addition to their home language. In many settings, this may seem like a child learning a home language, for example, of Vietnamese, and learning in classroom settings the language of English. So a multilingual learner is a learner that is learning an additional language, and this is a term used often synonymously with dual language learner or English learner. This child may also be learning a third, fourth additional language, but it's important to note multilingual does encompass a child that might be learning two. Talking more about articulation and alignment with terminology, it's also important for us to recognize that across our systems, sometimes the use of dual language immersion as a term may be something that is in need of further clarity. So just to make reference, we recognize that being able to provide primary language supports in our classroom settings is a wonderful and valuable scaffold for our learners. However, being able to provide primary language supports or translation services does not by nature state that it is a dual immersion program. So that is important to note. Dual immersion programs do exist and vibrantly in our preschool settings, but dual language immersion programs happen with great intentionality, an understanding of one's community to best construct a program that reflects the students' needs. For example, whether you're approaching a 50-50 program or a 90-10 program, how you build fluency with intention in support of your educators and your students. Moving into another element within our EL roadmap, it states that we must provide extra resources intentionally for our learners and our educators. One thought when thinking about extra resources, recognizing that our preschool schedules oftentimes are set. One area that you can focus on is recognizing that in early childhood settings, you're working with the most emerging of language learners or multilingual learners. So recognizing and supporting your educators and understanding language acquisition in regards to very frequently, our learners may be in a non-productive verbal state. That doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't learning happening. So a resource in being able to support your educators is having some thoughtful conversations about how language acquisition is a dynamic and nonlinear process. Now, coherency is something that I think we're all probably wondering about. And as we continue to receive guidance and support from family interview tools to ways in which we're making greater applications with our foundations framework, we recognize that building and understanding together about what the goals are for our early learning settings alongside our K-12 settings is vital. Lastly, to focus on principle 2, the EL roadmap calls attention to the need for all settings, starting in our early childhood settings, to have intellectual quality and meaningful access. In just a moment, Dr. Christy Baird is going to really highlight what element 2A, integrated designated ELD, looks like, or some considerations, as well as the importance of home language. Recognizing that in our early childhood settings, often the ways in which language is built into a classroom setting might happen through play and social interaction. The EL roadmap brings attention to heightening that awareness of how to increase language production with the use of academic language. To tell us more, Dr. Christy Baird will take us deeper.
Thank you, Dr. Chavez. If we could go to the next slide, please. So let's think about what we know about early childhood and multilingual learners. We know these three things, that research tells us when we think about this area, these three things are extremely important if we're going to support our multilingual learners in the way that we need to. High quality education plays a critical role. We must welcome our children and families, see them as assets, and then children benefit through those intentional language supports. So we're going to look more closely at these three things and what it might look like in our day. Next slide, please. As we think about the roadmap and principles 2 and 4, we're thinking about our systems and how we as administrators can support our teachers. Research indicates that these three areas of focus that are listed on the slide will help dual language learners thrive in our classrooms and will lay the foundation for their success in speaking multiple languages as they grow up. Our early childhood programs and our staff must be prepared to enhance experiences for this growing number of young children who are learning their home language and other languages. We know research tells us in California, 60% of our children birth to age 5 are dual language learners. As Dr. Chavez said, they're all at different levels. Some are speaking only their home language. Some have learned English. They really have 2 languages in a strong way. Some are adding English. So we have simultaneous dual language learners from birth. They've been learning 2 or more languages. And then we have children who are coming into our programs with their home or native language, and they're adding English or our program language onto that. We can promote positive experiences for these dual language learners by holding high expectations for every student by emphasizing their strengths, including their cultural and linguistic strengths. As administrators, we need to think about how do we build systems and how do we develop policies that improve practices across all of our service delivery areas. We need to do this to identify and implement planned, intentional approach to language use in our classrooms. So as we think about the supports that we can offer our young children, we know there's supports we can offer at home and in our early learning context that help prepare them for school and promote their academic achievement. High quality, intentional, and consistent exposure to home language and English can set children on a positive trajectory towards school success and bilingualism. So the question we need to ask ourselves then as administrators, what mindsets, what activities, and what types of instruction should we see in classrooms that are supportive of multilingual learners? Next slide, please. So the first area of focus we want to look at is just supporting children's use of home language. Teachers who demonstrate a positive attitude towards a children's home language and culture can have a strong, positive impact on a child's success for school. Too often in the past, we've made assumptions about children as multilingual learners. In the past, many of our programs have not had a system for learning about home language use. We may have asked parents when they enrolled what language they used in the home, or teachers may have used that information, noted it in their anecdotal notes, observations that they're making of children. But we haven't used that information to help us learn about children, their strengths, their assets, and to guide our instruction. Governor Newsom recently signed Assembly Bill 1363. This Assembly bill is going to start a uniform process that takes an asset-based approach to identifying dual language learners so that we can best support them in our programs. The data collected is going to help guide instruction and practice. It's going to build on dual language learners' linguistic skills and needs and support early childhood educators and quality early learning. This is a wonderful step forward for our program that has come about, that we are celebrating this use. So as we think about right now, what are ways that educators can show support for home language use in the classroom? What are things that you can do as a teacher if you're on here, or you should be seeing in your programs as an educator? First of all, we want to just encourage children to use their home language in the classroom. We want to make sure that children are not being shut down if they try their home language, but that it's encouraged and it's celebrated. Ways that children can see their home language and be encouraged to use it is through the use of books in our classroom. If the teacher can read in the home language, read books in the home language. If you can't as a teacher, we need to figure out, how do we invite people into our classroom? Is it volunteers? Is it other school staff? Are there family members, community members who can come into the classroom to read, to sing songs, to help write in the home language? When children see their own language being used in instruction, it elevates that home language for them. It validates for them that the language they speak is important. Another important thing that we can do as program administrators and as educators is to learn some phrases in the language that the child speaks. Again, this shows the child that you value their home language, that you think it is important. If we can greet children in their home language, if we can say goodbye to them in their home language, we're telling them, you're important in this room. You're important enough for me to acknowledge and me to recognize. Just this week, I was in a community of practice with teachers of dual language learners. And one teacher shared with us that she had asked parents about good morning type songs that they could share in their home language. Using her families as resources, she's built a repertoire of good morning songs in a variety of languages. This teacher is a language learner herself, although her native language is not one that is used in her classroom. It's not one any of the children in her classroom have. But her children have been asking her about her own home language. And these are 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. They're preschool children. And they realized their teacher had a home language. And they said, why don't we have a good morning song in your language? So this teacher's been supporting her children's use of home language. They've internalized that. And now they're supporting her use of her own home language. That's a classroom where the children know my language is valuable and it's important. Next slide, please. So in the last slide, we discussed how teachers show they value multilingualism by supporting children in their home language. But there's a lot more to this idea. We not only want to encourage language use by children, we want to intentionally and consistently work to develop authentic relationships and partnerships with the families that our program serves. Partnering with families is the only way to learn about each child's background, their strengths, and their interests. And these connections are what make learning meaningful, relevant, and sustainable. We want our classrooms to be mirrors to children where they see themselves. We also want them to be doors where they step in and they realize what I already know is valuable. What I know adds to what I can learn. So we want to ensure that as administrators, not only us and our teachers, together we're talking with families so that we can better understand their background experiences, their language, and their cultures. As administrators, we want to think about how do we help our program create open and welcoming learning and socialization spaces where families feel respected and trusted. For too long, school has often been a place where you leave your child and things happen to them there, right? But there hasn't necessarily been that connection between home and school. There hasn't been the feeling of what happens at home is also important at school. Children have often seen school and home as two different places, and we don't want that. We want to help children make connections between their world at home and their world at school. And we can do that by valuing the languages and cultures that come to our classroom. We can use a survey or an interview to find out about the home culture, and then children's home culture and their home languages can be resources that support and enrich our classroom learning experience. So we want to think about what assets are children bringing to the room, to our learning environment. Children come with many different experiences and skills. As program administrators, it's important to give teachers time to learn about each child and what they bring to the classroom. And then making sure teachers have the time and the resources to create spaces and activities where those children's strengths can shine. I think in preschool, we do a really good job of this, is that understanding that we're teaching children, not curriculum, but we want to think about what kinds of things are we doing in our program. We're examining our curriculum to make sure it includes information that's culturally relevant with topics that are familiar to children, such as holidays, stories, and foods. Take a moment now in the chat and think about, how do you learn about the cultures and the languages and the families? And just tell us in the chat quickly, what are ways your program uses to make sure you're learning about the families and what they're offering? I'll pause for a moment and give you opportunity to respond. So I'm seeing conversations, questionnaires, at intake, ask them, lots of family interviews and surveys. I noticed an important thing, using surveys throughout the year. That's really important. Sometimes we take those surveys, right, and we look at them at the beginning, but then they kind of go in a drawer and we forget about them. Meet and greets, conversation, parent meetings, monthly family projects. I noticed too, several people have mentioned that personal connection, pick up, drop off, just try to find those moments to talk. I see too, we have coffee sessions, parent meetings. Those daily connections are so important, right? I saw someone mention about when we were doing virtual meetings or virtual class, how that was different. I know I talked to a teacher not too long ago who mentioned that it was really interesting, virtually kind of changed how we got to know each other in different ways, since we so often sometimes saw each other's homes. Family tree, pictures posted. Cooking experiences, yes. And I saw someone mention it's that personal connection. And that's the bottom line, what this is seeing each other as people. And then on top of that, seeing our families as assets, that they have something to bring and to add. Family of the week, that's a great idea. We often do student of the week, but I haven't heard of family of the week. So you have lots of ways that you're thinking about how do we learn about our families. So the next step then is using what we've learned about families and home cultures to teach new material. So last slide, we talked about how do I honor and include students in checking in understanding that it's okay in this classroom, in this program to use your home language. Now we want to think about how do we use home language and culture for new materials? Because if I can use what I know, remember, we're making connections. We think about how our brains work. Our brains are designed to make meaning. And so we take what we know and we take what we're learning and we add what we know onto what we're learning and we make a connection. Now, our young children, we think about how their brains are growing and learning. And we know from brain research that people who are bilingual have stronger brains. They make more cognitive connections. In fact, they're even saying now there's a long-term effect. People that are bilingual, often Alzheimer's is delayed because their brain, so many connections have been made. But if we're going to value that bilingualism and that home language, we're going to use songs and stories, things from home culture to teach new material too, because we're going to help our children realize what I know is important and I can use it to make new things. We're going to incorporate books and pictures and story and music and toys that involve a variety of culture. When children see their own culture displayed in the classroom, it reinforces that they are valued and important. So these feelings support children's feelings of competence and help encourage that academic success. Now, when you take a look at your classroom, as administrators and as teachers in early childhood, we are used to looking at our classroom with checklists, right? And making sure that we have the right variety of things, the right centers that we're supposed to have, that rooms are safe and they're welcoming. But take a look with another practiced eye and ask yourself, when I look at my books, who's represented in this books? Not just do I have different genres of books, but who's represented? When I look at my toys, look at my food in my playhouse, who's being represented with this food and who's not represented? So we want to put on that lens and look at the things in our classroom, not just do we have the right number of things in the right centers, but what's in these centers, what's in these materials, and what else can I bring from there? Can families bring things from home? I noticed somebody mentioned bringing artifacts that represent families, right? Can they bring things from home that they can add to our classroom centers, to those types of things in there? When we bring in materials from children's homes, from their home culture, we not only demonstrate the respect for their cultures and traditions, but it helps our children feel more included in the classroom, and it supports language and literacy by building on children's background knowledge. Next slide, please. So as we think about that academic success, we want to think about the types of intentional teaching strategies that we see in the classroom. Now, Dr. Chavez mentioned the systems and coherency that we're seeing right now. And one of the things we're seeing is, what does TK look like, right? And maybe we have kindergarten teachers sitting on this who are now TK teachers, or we have teachers who have been preschool teachers and they're now TK teachers. And what does this look like in our classroom? What kind of intentional strategies do we want to see in the classroom? So we want to think about that idea of that integrated and designated language development. And as Dr. Chavez told us, in our early childhood classrooms, a lot of our language development is in that integrated time. So these slides, these things on this slide, the strategies, are indicators of the types of instruction that should be happening in classrooms on a regular basis. So I want you just to take a minute and think about these. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper about what this should look like in our classroom. These are the reason why these are strategies right here are so important is they provide opportunity to teach language learning in everything that our children are doing. So as teachers, we want these quick things to be on the tip of our head. As administrators, we want to be watching for them in our classrooms. These are the types of things that should be happening regularly. When we think about teachers and we think about our toolkit that we carry around, our teacher toolkit, these are things that should happen with every single strategy that we do. First of all, we want to use words multiple times in different meaningful contexts. All of us, this is true for you sitting right here on the slide, from children to adults. Depending on the researcher you read, we need to hear a word between 4 to 11 times before we begin attending to it, before we begin feeling like, I have a slight idea of what that word means. We need to use it 45 to 80 times in a meaningful, comprehensible context before we own that word. We can just use it authentically without thinking about it. So I can't hear a new word and say it 45 times and own that word. Language learning is not a light switch. It's not either on or off. It's more like a dimmer switch. We move from no knowledge of the word to, I've got some knowledge. I've kind of heard that word before, to, I know what that word is when I hear it, but I can't use it yet, to, I can use the word, but I need support. I need lots of context. This is this when you feel like, I know the perfect word for that, but I just can't think of it. That word is in that area. To finally where it's just used with automaticity and I don't have to think about it. So in our classrooms, we want to make sure that as we're teaching new words, new ideas, we're bringing them in a variety of ways. Our children are hearing us say them. Our children have opportunity to say the word with us, to do what's called vocal representation. See how that word feels in my mouth if it's a new word to me. Our children need to be singing that word. They need to be seeing the word in books, hearing it read, having opportunity to use the word in written ways so they see themselves as a reader. They need to be having opportunity in the activities that they're doing to use that new language, new words multiple times in different contexts. The next thing we want is we want to make sure we're asking open-ended questions. Open-ended questions will allow for longer and more creative responses. If we ask a closed question like, what color is the car? That just calls for a short factual answer. An open-ended question like, why do you think Sophia shared her toy with her friend? Encourages children to think and to talk more. So we want to make sure as teachers that we're asking those open-ended questions. We also want to make sure that we're using a variety of questions. We usually have our favorite, I call it our hip pocket question. I know for myself, if I have not pre-thought about questions, when I finish reading a book, my go-to question is, what was your favorite part of the book and why? Or who was your favorite character in the book and why? So I need to think strategically about other questions I'm asking. So as administrators, we want to help our teachers have that time to plan for that, to think about those questions. We want to provide teacher narration during activities. This is where a teacher describes what a child's doing and extends it. For example, a teacher might be watching a child play in the block area and say, I see you stacked 2 long blocks on top of each other. So that's narrating what the child did. And then the teacher could extend it. What are you going to do next? So teacher narration helps children use new vocabulary words and create longer, more complex sentences. We also want to make sure as teachers that we're not just filling in the space. We're really good as teachers at talking a lot, and we're not always as good at waiting for our children. But we want to wait, particularly for language learners, because they need time to hear what we asked, to think about the words. They might need to translate it to their home language and back to make sure that they know it, and they need to think about their answer. Too often, by the time they're ready to respond, we've already moved on, or we've answered our own question. So we want to think about wait time. And to help our teachers and ourselves remember, if we have trouble remembering wait time, I want you to offer you this acronym. Think about the letters for wait, W-A-I-T, and ask yourself, why am I talking? So provide teacher narration, ask those open-ended questions, and wait. Finally, We want to encourage children to make those connections. We talked about that before, making the connection from things they know in their home and their prior experience. That's so important. It's going to provide that bridge to understanding new vocabulary and new word meaning. So as you think about these strategies that support language development, and think about yourself for a minute, put in the chat box, what's one of your favorite strategies that you use that support language development, that help your children talk? Jim Cummins tells us, when we hear the motor running, we know the brain is engaged. So what are you doing that's your favorite thing? This gets my children talking. Briefly put it in the chat room. Or as an administrator, what's your favorite thing to see in your classrooms that's getting children talking? See lots of songs. That's one of my very favorite. And interesting activities, right? Things that children are going to be drawn to, and they're going to ask, why? Why is this happening? Lots of free choice and hands-on. I see bringing in their favorite things. And lots of asking them, what do you think?
Dr. Baird, I see a lot of asking questions, prompting, cooking, hands-on opportunities, sharing
Yes.
about cultural experiences. And I really appreciate, Dr. Baird, how you shared about the importance of using the family as a resource for this, and encouraging that dialogue and conversation as well. Telling their own story, how powerful. We're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, and just looking through ways of engaging our students and families, right, on sharing their own stories.
That's right. And when we want to think about education, bottom line, it's about relationship, right? That's what we're talking about here. So when we're sharing our stories, we're building that relationship. And I love all the strategy you're saying here about talking about the child, taking it back to them, their stories. I saw several people mentioned about sharing days. I see collaborative groups being met in here. That's all so important. So when we think about all these things, and we're talking that big global, as we move on through our series here, we're going to be going more and more down to specific strategies and activities. But I want to turn it back to Lisa Clark, because she's going to talk about a specific program that we have that you can learn about.
Thanks, Dr. Baird. Finding time and resources for professional learning can be a real challenge. We would like to highlight a free professional learning opportunity made available through MCAP and the Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. This professional learning is from our digital academy, which Dr. Castro will talk about a little bit later. But this specific academy focuses on instructional strategies for teachers of dual language preschool learners. Participants can learn about high quality instructional preschool design, as well as strategies that support our earliest multilingual learners, and presented by our early childhood experts at the Lighthouse for Children. Participants can also access this academy asynchronously and earn a badge too. You'll see from our academy different scenarios from real live classrooms with teachers engaging with students, and it can be a really powerful professional learning opportunity. Dr. Castro will highlight some other offerings that we have available through MCAP.
Thank you so much, Lisa. The multilingual offers the series of MCAP academies. We have 9 academies that are available with 12 hours of asynchronous learning. At the conclusion or at the completion of any of these academies, I know Dr. Chavez is here with us today, and she and her team lead GLAD, Secondary GLAD, and Project GLAD in Espanol, as well as our partners and friends in San Bernardino, who lead the special education for bilingual settings. We have with us today Isela Jacobo from San Diego County. And I know from San Diego County, they also offer RIGHT, the RIGHT Institute. We are also joining us here today from Butte. We have our MCAP lead, Holly, who will share a little bit more about the digital academy that is offered from her county. So this is one of the resources that is available to all of you statewide that you can share widely with your educators across the state. We've dropped the link on the chat, and these are, again, asynchronous, high quality professional learning opportunities to deepen your learning on how to support students that are in early childhood education. Lisa just shared with us the opportunity offered here for preschool teachers of dual language learners. Now, as we move on to our next slide, we also have additional opportunities. I'm really thrilled today during the session that was facilitated by Dr. Chavez and Dr. Baird, as well as Lisa Clark, learning more about using our families as resources, building on the assets of children, the linguistic, the cultural assets, and that cultural capital to bridge it back to our schools, right? And what we can do as educators and as leaders to support an assets-based framework. We also want to invite you to join us to our Dual Language Design Thinking Network. This is a free opportunity. November 1st is our first date that we're meeting, where we come in to share our experiences, to share resources, to expand and stretch our learning about instructional strategies and practices. And this is really for teachers, administrators, and leaders. So please join us. That will be kicking off on November 1st. And then there are 5 other sessions after that. So if you register through the link here, you'll be registered through the 5 sessions. So as we move on to our next one, next opportunity, we know that many of you here are already implementing the State Seal of Biliteracy, and also launched last year by the California Department of Education under the leadership of Gina Garcia Smith and the team, the multilingual team. We know that there's also a pathway to biliteracy. And so we invite you to join us for our network. Our next network will be on Wednesday, October 26th. This is an opportunity also to learn about how do I implement the state seal at the high school level, or a pathway in K-12, right, to recognize students' linguistic and cultural assets. And we do have guests coming into the network to share with us highlights and best practices. We've had several districts highlight how they're continuing to build momentum with their students, with the families, and with the community. That's happening October 26th. And joining us today on our next slide from Butte, our MCAP lead, I'd like to invite Holly Hardy to come in and speak to us about a fabulous opportunity addressing the needs that we are seeing across the state of teacher shortage. Holly, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Alma, and everyone. Thank you for inviting me into your space. I heard some wonderful things. It's so exciting to hear about these young learners and all the support they're receiving. So if you know of anyone in the state of California who would like to become a teacher, a bilingual teacher, we have a pathway for you. And thank you very much to MCAP for highlighting our pathway. We want to bring along as many want to be future teachers who are out there thinking about becoming teachers. We're offering some in-person sessions as well as virtual in those 5 counties listed. Anyone is welcome. We are asking that you will share this flyer far and wide, share it personally to someone you think who wants to get their credential, share it just to anyone who you think wants to get their credential. We're interested in helping anyone and everyone. So please help us share this opportunity. We need to build the number of bilingual teachers that we have in our preschools, in our TKs, and all of our schools. So we're hoping that you will help us by sharing this opportunity.
Thank you, Holly, and your team for coming out. It's a hybrid. We will be in, as a team, coming out to different county offices, but also the virtual learning. And Holly, I know that I shared a minute ago, but there's also an online component, that asynchronous academy that's offered by your county to support the growth of increasing bilingual teachers across the state. So thank you. And we'll move on to our next slide. I know joining us today, we have amazing, we're going to do a quick stop share for just a quick second so we can do a quick refresh. And it gives us an opportunity to be in a space where we see 150 colleagues across the state, educators, leaders, just leading on this passionate work, right? Really expanding opportunities for our 1.1 million multilingual learners across the state. So as you are joining this work today, we're going to share our screen one more time because we've updated a slide to share another important opportunity. But while we do that, I'm going to invite you, if you'd like to be in our group photo, we're going to do a couple of group shots. And then also, Sarah, if we can just do a group shot right before we invite, we have joining us today our CABE CEO, Jan Gustafson Correa, who's gonna give us a brief message and invite us to our CABE 2023. Jan, welcome.
Thanks so much, Alma. Thank you, everybody. You know, it's just been a pleasure to be here. I want to thank our presenters today, Dr. Baird, Lisa Clark, Dr. Nicole Chavez, just for your insights and what you shared with us today. Before I share about CABE 2023, I just want to highlight what I saw as this really promising. It's really, again, focused on our EL roadmap and how we're supporting our English learners are at our early education stage. And what I really love, all three of you have presented today, was the focus on home language, the value of culture, and looking at those specific strategies that really draw out the assets of our students. And Dr. Baird, I really heard you really hone in and really focus on that oral language development and how we bring that into our classrooms in engaging, inviting ways. And as an administrator, whether you're at that role now, leading your school site or leading a program or aspiring to that, having that vision and seeing how it connects to the roadmap is so key. And then what I love through the series is when we come back in December and then later on in 2023, we'll be looking at that educator focus and those strategies to use in those classrooms. So just the power and the impact of what this means for our students of diverse language and cultural backgrounds to build on their language, yes, to help develop in English, of course, but how can we develop our programs so that they are really building literacy and biliteracy and multiliteracy in their home language, in English, and possibly other languages as well, as we strive to create a multilingual California. So thank you again to all our presenters, and thank you all for being with us. We do want to invite you to be part of continued professional learning, and you've heard a lot of resources today. The one that we really hope you'll come to be with us at is our CABE 2023 annual conference. We're back in person finally. We'll be in Long Beach, March 22nd through the 25th. It's just a gathering of our community. We'll have a focus from early education all the way up to university and beyond. The link is in the chat now to go. Registration is open. We encourage you to come to sign up to be a part of this in-person gathering, 4 days of incredibly engaging speakers, presentations, and opportunities for you to present as well and to listen to your colleagues and peers in the field. So join us at CABE 2023. Our theme this year is testimonials, the power of our stories, our art, and our dreams. And so we welcome you, and we're looking forward to seeing you in December as we hone in and deepen even our thinking around how we serve our earliest learners in dual language settings. So thank you so much, and I'll pass it back to Dr. Castro.
Thank you, Jan. And yes, of course, thanking all of our presenters for today. We're going to move on to the next slide, please. And as we move on to closing for this evening, we really want to thank you for being here with us today, for being our partners in this work, for learning, and also sharing of resources. I know that at the beginning of our presentation, there were a few links that were dropped in the chat that we want to remind you. We're going to continue to build on that link of resources for session 1, 2, and 3. And then I know Sarah is going to share a little bit about joining us through other platforms as well.
Hi, all. It is so exciting to see so many people from across the state and beyond. We want to share other opportunities like this with you. Please follow us on all of the social media you see here. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. We have our website there. There's the link page that I put in the chat, has all the links that we shared today. We know it's been a lot of information. We kept putting lots of things in the chat. So you have that all together in that one document, and that way we'll be able to build on that same document and add resources in our next 2 sessions as well. There is a link in there as well to sign up for email updates. We really hope more of you can join us for other offerings. We have all kinds of things for educators, administrators, really anyone, families, anyone who is supporting our students and our schools. So please take a moment, bookmark that link. And I think the next slide has a reminder of our final, our next date. If we can go to the next slide. Our next session is more educator focused. That is on December 8th, 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. So please, as some of you we know from the chat, some of you are educators and others are administrators. Please invite your educators to join. This second session will be more educator focused, and the final one will be learning implementation focused as well. So we hope you're able to join us for all 3 of those, one or whichever ones you're free to join us for. It's been a pleasure to have you all here. And Alma, do you have any final words for us before we send people off?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. We want to again thank our presenters today. This series is made possible by the MCAP grant, but by our facilitators today, Dr. Nicole Chavez, Dr. Christine Baird, Lisa Clark. Thank you for coming in today and facilitating. And of course, we have representation from our CABE leadership and board, and we want to thank all of our leaders for being here. You as educators and leaders across the state leading in the work of Multilingual California. This is a topic that is going to continue to build